For today's build, we will invest every talent, gear and stats into making Ignite as powerful as possible. If you are looking for a talent build, skip to 1 minute and 5 seconds. The gear and setup section starts at 7 minutes and 7 seconds. The rotation guide begins at 9 minutes and 16 seconds. And if you just want to see my thoughts on the build and watch some actual gameplay, head over to 10 minutes and 52 seconds. The cool thing about this build is that you don't have to sacrifice your normal combustion burst. You still get the classic Fire Blast, Pyroblast kill window. But at the same time, your Ignite ramps up to nearly 35,000 damage per second, putting tremendous additional pressure on the target. And the fun doesn't stop there. Right after combustion ends, all of those stacked Ignites detonate at once, creating one final burst that can instantly finish off enemies who thought they had survived. If you watch this video all the way to the end, I'm confident that even you have never played Fire Mage before, you will be able to pick up this build and have a blast in Battlegrounds. For our hero talent, we are going with Frostfire. The reason is simple. The entire concept of this build is to maximize Ignite damage, and Sunfury doesn't really offer much that directly supports that goal. Frostfire, on the other hand, has talents like Molten Chill, which increases the damage of Ignites applied by Frostfire spells by another 10%. And here's the important part. It's not just Frostfire Bolt that benefits. Thanks to hit sync, one of your most frequently used spells, Fire Blast, also gets converted into Frostfire with 15% increased damage. We also take Elemental Conduit, which allows Comet Storm and Glacial Spike to apply Ignite as well. This synergizes perfectly with the rest of the build because Comet Storm is automatically triggered by Meteor through Isothermic Core, while Glacial Spike is triggered by Pyroblast through Duality. Please note that Ignite is applied by Frostfire Bolt, Fire Blast, Meteor, Comet Storm, and Glacial Spike. One spell that's not on the list is Scorch, despite the fact that 99% of PvP Fire Mages rely on it all the time. And that's actually the first defining feature of this build. We completely cut Scorch out of the rotation. Instead of weaving Scorch, we are focusing entirely on abilities that generate Ignite, and we will boldly cut out any spells that don't apply it. As for Meteor, you've probably seen it in plenty of one-shot builds already. With talents like Flash Freeze Burn, Blast Radius, and Deep Impact, its damage can be increased by well over 120%. Of course, since it doesn't land until about 3 seconds after you cast it, it can be difficult to hit it consistently. However, if you set it up with crowd control like Polymorph or Ice Nova, it actually connects surprisingly often. If you're running random battlegrounds, you can use Net Series from Tailoring Profession to root your enemies until Meteor hits them. However, the real core of this build is not Meteor nor Pyroblast. Surprisingly, it's your basic filler spell, Frostfire Bolt. Not only does Frostfire Bolt deal pretty solid damage on its own, but when you combine it with fire talents like Scald and Molten Fury, it starts doing ridiculous damage to targets below 30% health. Honestly, it almost feels wrong for a basic filler spell to hit this hard. In fact, against targets under 30% health, simply spamming Frostfire Bolt can sometimes hit harder than trying to force a difficult combo. On top of that, Frostfire Bolt can be boosted by another 60% through the Frostfire Empowerment proc. One thing you should know is that Frostfire Empowerment normally has only a 10% chance to trigger at random. However, you can actually guarantee the proc. Thanks to Flash Freeze Burn, casting Meteor will guarantee Frostfire Empowerment, giving you a powered up Frostfire Bolt exactly when you want it. One tip is that Meteor triggers follow-up spells like Comet Storm, so it's much more efficient to use it during combustion, when all of those spells are guaranteed to crit. Since Meteor doesn't land until about 3 seconds after you cast it, you can actually cast Meteor first and then activate Combustion afterward. The timing still works just fine. Next, let's look at the Fire Mage talents that directly affect Ignite. And as you'd expect from a Fire Mage, There are a lot of them. First, Inflame increases the ignite triggered by Pyroblast by 25%. Then, Intensifying Flame gives another 30% increase, but only when you are hitting 3 or fewer targets. Slow Burn increases your ignite damage by 15% during combustion, while Master of Flame works in the opposite situation, giving you a constant 15% ignite increase when combustion is not active. And finally, we have Burnout. When combustion ends, 75% of your remaining ignite damage detonates all at once. And honestly, this is where you sometimes see people just instantly disappear. The reason this build is so strong is that you still get the full traditional combustion burst without giving anything up. But that's not the end of it. Just when the enemy thinks the danger is over and combustion has ended, all of the stacked ignite damage detonates at once, often dealing another 100,000 damage or more. For PvP talents, Glass Cannon is mandatory for this build because it increases both Frostfire Bolt and ignite damage by a massive 20%, which is exactly what we are trying to maximize. Of course, there is a trade-off. In exchange, your maximum health is reduced by 30%, turning you into a true Glass Cannon. Thankfully, mages are not like warlocks or shadow priests. Those classes can often sit there, trade cooldown, and survive while being focused. Mages generally don't play that way. When a mage becomes a target, the usual response isn't to tank the damage, it's to get out. That makes the downside a little more manageable, but don't underestimate it. You are still incredibly fragile. One mistake, one bad position, and you can disappear very quickly. Think of yourself as a sharp but fragile dagger. Your number one priority is always to find a safe position and favorable situation before committing damage. If you can do that, the extra damage from Glass Cannon is absolutely worth it. For the Midnight Season 1 tier set, I went with the shoulders, helm, gloves, and legs to maintain the 4-piece bonus, mainly because the Pyroblast enhancement and Fireblast cooldown reduction are just too good to pass up. The downside, however, is that going for the 4-piece set significantly reduces your versatility, which is arguably the most important PvP stat. To compensate for that, I socketed versatility gems in every available slot, and I even crafted separate boosts with only versatility stat. As I mentioned, this build already sacrifices a huge amount of survivability because of Glass Cannon PvP talent. You are playing with substantially reduced health from the start, so if you also neglect versatility, you are going to have a very rough time staying alive. For secondary stats, I prioritize haste after versatility. The reason is that even though Ignite's tick rate is not affected by haste, haste still reduces your global cooldown and lowers the cooldown of key spells like Fire Blast. That means you can fit more spells into combustion, which is the far most important burst window for this build. As for Critical Strike, I don't invest much into it. Once combustion is active, you are effectively critting everything anyway, so stacking crit on your gear doesn't provide nearly as much value as it normally would. I also do not prioritize mastery very heavily. Between talents like Feel the Burn and Slow Burn, you already gain a decent amount of bonus mastery during combat. The key thing to understand is that Ignite only deals a percentage of your direct damage as burn damage, so rather than focusing on increasing that percentage as much as possible, it's often more effective to increase the total amount of direct damage you're dealing in the first place. And the best way to do that is through haste. More haste means more cast, more Fire Blast, more Pyroblast, and ultimately a larger ignite. That's why haste stacking ends up being so valuable for this build. The rotation is pretty straightforward, so I'll keep this brief. Once you get a hot streak proc, you are ready to start your burst sequence. So it should look like Meteor, Combustion, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast. By this point, you should have 2 stacks of Frostfire empowerment, and your Fire Blast charges will usually be recovering. From there, continue with Frostfire Bolt, Pyroblast, Frostfire Bolt, and Pyroblast. And if there's still time left on Combustion, simply go back to Fire Blast and Pyroblast combo. That's really the core idea of the build. Stack as many powerful direct damage spells as possible during combustion, build an enormous ignite in the process, and then let the ignite pressure and eventual burnout detonation finish the job. Be brave during combustion. The closer you are to the target, the more effective your burst becomes. Why? Because Fire Blast hits instantly, while Pyroblast has travel time. The further away you are, the longer it takes for each Pyroblast to impact. When you are closer to the target, your Pyroblasts land much faster, which means you can chain your Fire Blast Pyroblast combos more quickly and fit more damage into your combustion window. It can feel a little uncomfortable at first, especially in PvP, but if you're looking to maximize your burst, don't be afraid to step in and play more aggressively during combustion. The biggest advantage of this build is that it plays almost exactly like a traditional Fire Mage, except that we don't use Scorch. Other than that, the playstyle is very familiar. Fire Mage is one of the most enjoyable PvP specs because of the explosive burst windows, and the ability to deal so much damage without hard casting. The build keeps all of that intact. The difference is that by investing heavily into Ignite, you are able to maintain meaningful pressure even outside of combustion. And when the combustion is available, you don't have to give up any of your normal burst damage. You still get the same devastating Fire Blast and Pyroblast combo, but now you also have the added threat of a massive Ignite detonation afterward, giving you another way to finish off targets who survive the initial bursts. The biggest downside of this build is that since we are not using Scorch, we do lose a lot of ability to deal damage while moving. That's a pretty significant trade-off because one of the Fire Mage's traditional strength is being able to keep pressure up even while repositioning. With this build, you are much more dependent on finding good opportunities to stand your ground and execute your burst properly. The other major weakness is survivability. Because we are running Glass Cannon, our health pool is noticeably smaller, making us much more vulnerable when we get focused. And that's especially important in Battlegrounds, where hunters, arguably one of a mage's biggest natural predators, are everywhere. If you're not careful with your positioning, it's very easy to get punished. That said, the downside is manageable. With enough versatility and the overpowered barrier PvP talent, you can recover a surprising amount of durability and offset some of the risks that comes with the Glass Cannon. As for your role in Battlegrounds, the Fire Mage is generally weaker at no defense than Frost Mage, mainly because Frost has access to a pet and significantly better tools for controlling a capture point. Because of that, I don't recommend playing Fire Mage as a dedicated base defender. You are usually much more valuable participating in teamfights and helping your team winning team battles. When combustion is unavailable, your job is fairly simple. Stay at a safe distance, keep applying pressure, and build up ignite damage whenever possible. Once combustion is ready, your playstyle should change completely. That's when you want to step forward, play aggressively, and commit to your full burst combo. Of course, experienced opponents will recognize your combustion and try to respond with defensive cooldowns. That's perfectly normal. The good news is that combustion is only a 1-minute cooldown. If the enemy survives this burst window, it's not a disaster. You can force cooldowns on the first combustion, reset, and then come back with another one before many players are ready to deal with it again. That should be enough explanation for the build. For the rest of the video, I will let the gameplay speak for itself as we watch this 2800 MMR match. If you have made it this far, you should have a pretty good idea how the build works, what its strengths are, and what situations you should be looking for. So sit back, enjoy the gameplay, and see how it performs in real Battleground. And don't forget to check the comments for the talent codes.